Greetings, Mace here. Today we're going to look at making some bread in the style of French bread, which isn't really French, it's like an American style of French bread. So let us begin. The ingredients for this bread are similar to the ones we used when we made our pizza. 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast or 1 package of instant yeast, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 3 cups of flour, and 1 cup and 1 tablespoon of warm water. We're going to start by mixing our yeast with our water just to make sure that it's still alive. Okay, now that our yeast is done propagating, we're going to move on to the actual process. Get out the big mixing bowl, and now we're going to add our flour. I'm using hard flour for this. You can use all-purpose if you want, but hard flour or bread flour generally tastes a bit better. And then we'll add our salt and our sugar, and then we need to add a little bit of wet stuff to this. So then we're going to add our olive oil and our water with yeast. Perfect. And now we'll give that a bit of a stir and move on to the next step. The next step is to simply mix it more and more and more until it combines into a nice batter. Now I'm just going to mix it with my hands inside the bowl for a little bit, and then I'm going to dump it out on the counter and start mixing it there because I just need more space to work on this, and it's a lot easier to knead dough on the counter. But you don't want to knead it too early on the counter because then you start sending flour flying in every direction, and that can be quite messy and a little bit of a pain to clean up. And I found it was a little bit dry, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water here. I've edited the recipe at the beginning to have another tablespoon of water, which is what I think I added here to get it to kind of combine, because it was just a little bit too dry at the start. So with that extra tablespoon or so of water, it's starting to come together pretty good. Now if you run into the other problem where it's too sticky, then you just add a sprinkle of flour. Dust your hands a little bit, give it a little bit more of a mix, and you can fine tune the amount of stickiness factor in your dough pretty easily. And I'm just going to knead this for about 5 minutes or so, and then I'm going to move on to the next step. I should probably mention now, because I forgot to mention earlier, this makes about 1 loaf. So now I'm just going to coat the bowl with a little bit of oil, rub it in the oil, and now I'm going to cover it with the towel and put it in the oven with the light bulb on for about half an hour. Now this is a really exotic bread in that it uses a double rising method, which is kind of crazy. So now we take it out of the oven, we can see it's risen quite a ways. It's significantly bigger than it was when we started. Get a little bit of flour on the countertop, a little flour from above, a little flour on the rolling pin, and we're going to roll this out nice and flat. This is kind of crazy. It's a really exotic bread, this one. And once we have ourselves a nice big sheet of batter, or dough I should say, we're going to start rolling it from one edge and rolling it all up into one big piece. Now from here you're supposed to roll it a little bit more, but I wasn't aggressive enough with my rolling. I should have rolled it out on the counter a little bit more, and that way it holds together a little bit better. Because if you don't do that, what can happen is it won't really fuse together properly, and then you almost have like a cinnamon bun shaped bread thing. And then we'll just cover it with a towel and we'll throw it back in the oven, give it another half hour to rise a second time. Okay, pretty exciting, isn't it? I know. But we're almost done, so hang in there. So now we'll take our towel off, and we see we have a nice, great big loaf looking bread thing. So we're going to begin cutting some relief cuts in it, that way it doesn't explode when we cook it. And I cut a little bit too deep, and I dug down with my fingers a little too much, so a little bit of a hand pat to clear out the hand marks, and then we can move on to the next step, which is going to be an egg wash. So we're going to take an egg, we're going to beat it, and then we're going to use the brush and brush the egg onto the loaf itself. And it'll do a good job of making the bread all nice and golden at the end of this. I also put a little bit of salt on the top of it. I think that kind of helps out a little bit. Of course, I got one more secret technique to enhance this bread, and that is to use ice cubes in the bottom tray of the oven. So I'm just going to put a couple ice cubes on a sheet pan and stick that on the tray below the one that the bread goes on, and that'll increase the moisture in the oven. The real fancy baking ovens, they have humidity control in them, and they actually spray almost like water on the bread as it's being baked, and that really enhances the way the bread comes out. So one way we can do this is we can put ice cubes on a tray underneath of it. Another one is to put a bat of water underneath your bread. But I decided to go with the ice cube method this time. So we're just going to bake this at 375 degrees for about 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to check it with the toothpick method. Once it's all golden brown, it's usually good to go. If you have the willpower, it's best to wait till the bread's cold before eating it. I, however, lack such willpower, so I had to eat it as is. Anyway, that's the end of this one, so let me know in the comments below how you make your French bread. And if you like my content and would like to see more of it, please subscribe and like the video. And until next time, stay awesome.